The Zodiac killer was a notorious murderer who seemingly killed not just for the sake of it, but for the media attention that followed. To him, it was all a twisted game of catch me if you can. He reveled in the fear he instilled and took joy in taunting the police. The Zodiac would send detailed letters to law enforcement and the media, revealing information about the murders that only the killer would know. His correspondence often contained secret codes, further mocking the authorities by challenging them to decipher his identity. The Zodiac's criminal activities began with the shooting of two teenagers at a lover's lane in Benicia, California, in December 1968. Over the following year, he claimed several more victims, targeting young couples in secluded locations. His meticulous planning aimed to attract as much attention as possible, drawing the police into his deadly game. Despite an extensive investigation and hundreds of potential suspects, the Zodiac killer was never definitively identified. Although he claimed to have killed as many as 37 people, authorities could only link him to 5 confirmed murders. Killer Clown John Wayne Gacy, often referred to as Pogo the Clown, was a seemingly benign figure who volunteered at community events and charities. However, behind this facade lay a dark secret. He murdered 33 young men in Norwood Park Township, Illinois, between 1972 and 1978. Gacy lured his victims into his home by advertising job opportunities. Once inside, he would torture them before ultimately strangling or suffocating them to death. Gacy's killing spree came to an end in 1978, when police discovered a significant number of human remains buried in the crawl space of his home and nearby areas. The investigation revealed that he had meticulously documented his crimes in journals and even kept mementos from his victims. For Gacy, the murder of these young men was a thrilling game that brought him immense satisfaction. In 1980, he was convicted of 33 counts of murder and sentenced to death. Even as he faced his demise, his final words were chilling. "Kiss my ass." Ted Bundy. On the surface, Ted Bundy appeared to be a charming and charismatic individual. He adeptly used his sociability to gain the trust of his victims. For nearly 4 years, he committed over 30 murders without raising suspicion. Between 1974 and 1978, Bundy embarked on a multi-state killing spree, primarily targeting young women and girls. He lured his victims by posing as an authority figure or feigning injury, using crutches or slings to manipulate them into assisting him. This facade made him appear less threatening and provided a means to draw them closer to his vehicle, where he would brutally murder them. Bundy's methods were particularly gruesome. He would sometimes revisit crime scenes to engage in acts of necrophilia. He decapitated at least 12 of his victims, keeping their severed heads as morbid trophies. Despite his regular killings, Bundy managed to evade capture for years, blending in seamlessly with society. He outwardly seemed like a regular guy. He dated women. He maintained relationships, held a job, and rarely aroused suspicion. During his trial in Florida, Bundy acted as his own lawyer, attempting to portray himself as a victim of a dysfunctional upbringing. However, the overwhelming evidence against him led to his conviction and subsequent death sentence. Milwaukee Cannibal, Jeffrey Dahmer, infamously known as the Milwaukee Cannibal, was involved in crimes that included necrophilia, cannibalism, and the permanent preservation of body parts from his victims. Dahmer lured young men, primarily African American, back to his apartment under the guise of offering them companionship or assistance. Once there, he would drug his victims and commit horrifying acts after killing them. He dismembered their bodies, keeping various body parts, such as skulls and genitalia, as trophies, even eating some of the body parts. Dahmer even attempted to conduct experiments on some of his victims, trying to induce a zombie-like state using a drill and harmful chemicals. He confessed to killing 15 men and boys, but the total number of his victims could be higher as one of his underage victims managed to escape even though Dahmer had drilled a hole in his head. Still, the police returned to Dahmer's house as Jeffrey would lie that he was his drunk boyfriend. Dahmer was ultimately arrested in 1991 and sentenced to life in prison, but met a violent end when an inmate killed him in prison. Jack the Ripper. Jack the Ripper may not have had the highest death toll compared to other serial killers, but he committed his murders with a precise, surgical approach that has intrigued historians and criminologists for decades. The Ripper's victims, 5 women, had their throats cut with meticulous skill, and the murders occurred in the impoverished Whitechapel district of London in 1888. The victims were typically prostitutes, and the killer likely paid for their services, only to lead them to their tragic fates. During this time, the public relied heavily on newspapers for information, increasing the terror as unread rumors spread. The Ripper was notorious for removing the internal organs of his victims with extraordinary care. Knowledge of human anatomy was limited to the wealthiest members of society, which led to fears that the Ripper might be highly educated or affluent himself. After the first victim was discovered, a series of murders continued, creating panic as rumors circulated about the Ripper's identity, including bizarre theories that he could be a vampire or a vengeful spirit targeting the immoral. Authorities, however, offered little protection for the victims, primarily due to their status as marginalized individuals. Despite extensive investigations and numerous suspects proposed over the years, the identity of Jack the Ripper remains one of the greatest mysteries in criminal history. Charles Manson. Charles Manson was a cult leader who formed a commune known as the Manson family in the late 1960s. He attracted a devoted group of followers, mostly young women, with his charismatic personality and dark philosophies. Manson preached a race war he called Helter Skelter, intending to commit murders against celebrities while blaming them on African American gangs. In August 1969, under Manson's orders, his followers brutally murdered pregnant actress Sharon Tate and 4 others at her Los Angeles home. The following night, they killed a couple, Leno and Rosemary LaBianca, leaving behind messages written in blood that referred to police officers as pigs. Manson, who manipulated his followers into committing the murders, did not personally kill anyone himself, but faced heavy consequences for his orchestrations. He was convicted of conspiracy to commit murder and originally sentenced to death. However, this sentence was later commuted to life in prison. The Butcher of Plainfield. Ed Gein, known as the Butcher of Plainfield, lived an isolated life with his domineering mother on their family farm in Wisconsin. After his mother died in 1945, Gein's mental state deteriorated, leading him down a dark path of necrophilia, grave robbery, and murder. In 1957, local authorities searching for a missing woman discovered items in Gein's home that revealed some of the most disturbing details in murder history. He crafted household items and clothing from human skin and body parts, including skulls used as bowls and human skin furniture. Gein had been exhuming corpses from local graveyards to collect body parts, all stemming from his obsession with his deceased mother. His crimes culminated in the murder of 2 women whose bodies were found mutilated on his property. Diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, Gein was ruled legally insane. Nevertheless, the horror he inflicted inspired the creation of iconic horror films such as Psycho and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. The Nightstalker. In June 1984, a series of horrifying murders occurred across California, with a killer dubbed the Nightstalker at the center of the chaos. The murderer would break into homes late at night, brutally assaulting and killing his victims while often performing satanic rituals. His methods were marked by extreme violence and sadism, with police investigating gruesome crime scenes marked by satanic symbols. The Nightstalker's reign was characterized by not just murder, but also prolonged acts of torture and psychological torment inflicted on his victims. The search for the Nightstalker became one of California's largest manhunts, involving over 200 detectives. In August 1985, Ramirez was identified and apprehended after being beaten by a group of residents in East Los Angeles. During his trial, Ramirez embraced his persona, flashing a pentagram in front of cameras and taunting the families of his victims. In a bizarre twist, one of the jurors in Ramirez's trial, Phyllis Singletary, died unexpectedly from a lethal combination of alcohol and prescription drugs during the penalty phase. This fueled speculation about a supernatural connection to the case. Ultimately, Ramirez was convicted of 13 counts of murder, 5 attempted murders, and numerous burglaries. The Rostov Ripper, responsible for the murders of at least 53 women and children in the Russian towns of Rostov, Shakhty, and Novocherkassk between 1973 and 1990, operated during a time when investigative techniques were limited. The killer, Andrei Chikatilo, preyed on vulnerable individuals, often approaching them in public places such as train stations or parks with offers of assistance or money. Chikatilo gained the trust of his victims, leading them to isolated locations where he unleashed unspeakable violence, including biting off their tongues and other body parts, acts of necrophilia, and cannibalism. Despite a lengthy investigation by Soviet authorities, Chikatilo managed to evade capture for more than a decade. His killing spree ultimately came to an end in 1990 when a routine document check linked him to the murders. During his trial, Chikatilo confessed to the killings, detailing the pleasure he derived from the violence and mutilation. He was found guilty of 52 murders and sentenced to death by firing squad in 1994.
Thanks for watching. I hope you like it. Next video will be coming soon. Bye!